I first heard of the idea of grit and resilience back in 2013 from the work of psychologist, researcher, and author Angela Duckworth. Her work explores this notion of a gritty person, and she spells out the relationship between grit and success. According to Duckworth, grit is this quality that can help us predict success in achieving our goals. It's a combination of passion and resilience for very long-term goals. And what her research found is that grit has almost no correlation with talent. And in some cases, she found there to be an inverse relationship with talent. I was captivated with her observations, and it made me reflect on my own journey through academia. Over the years, many people have told me that I'm resilient, because I've had a non-traditional path in life filled with detours. I was born to an incarcerated mother and a father who was in hiding from law enforcement. Due to my parents' political involvement with civil rights organizations, our family's life was a rebellion against the government. This included the education system. I was never allowed to attend kindergarten, elementary, middle, or high school, and I struggled with illiteracy until adulthood. At age 8, my parents were incarcerated again, and my older brothers and I went into hiding. With our remaining money, we purchased a school bus, converted it into a living space, and for years we traveled to different cities throughout California, trying to evade warrants and fines from cities for sleeping in our vehicle. I was raised off the grid, and I lived on the margins of urban society. This bus was my home for the majority of my childhood and into adulthood. No electricity, no running water. Because I was truant, I wasn't allowed to tell anyone that I wasn't receiving an education, nor allowed out of the bus until after 3 p.m. I pushed back the window curtains and I would peer out to see teenagers walking home from school and engaging in culture and society in ways that I longed for. But without a formal education, I wasn't fully able to teach myself arithmetic or how to write, and I relied on my older brother to teach me how to read. But when I was 13 years old, my older brother developed schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, and was arrested for attempting to take his own life. Soon after, he moved out of the bus and would frequently be arrested for sleeping on the streets. I quickly began to see how people fell through the cracks of an inadequate public health infrastructure and were funneled into criminal court. And so, I decided that I wanted to pursue a legal career, defending people and families from the impacts of a criminal legal system and a public health infrastructure in need of improvements. There were so many days spent alone in that bus, looking in a mirror with a dark blanket wrapped around me, dreaming of being a judge. I longed for a world in which judges could empathize with what it was like to grow up homeless, without an education, or with parents who were sentenced to years of incarceration based on race. I wished for a judiciary that understood that sentencing thousands and thousands of suicidal or schizophrenic people to jail was fundamentally unjust. I looked in the mirror and I saw a long-term goal for myself and for this country. And what I came to realize after all of those years of looking in the mirror is that my success was intimately tied to the success of this country. I didn't want to be successful out of my own ambition. I cultivated resilience and stamina over the years because I wanted a different legacy for the US. One in which children like myself were not forced to be resilient. I agree with Dr. Duckworth. Resilience is a good thing. And while I believe there's more that we can do to help young people cultivate a sense of resilience in the face of adversity, people need to be provided with support and resources. We have to ask ourselves, are our social systems, like the criminal justice system, education, or public health, forcing people to be resilient? I didn't begin my formal education until I was 17. I persuaded my parents to enroll me in community college, and I saw this as the first steps in overcoming illiteracy, learning about the world, and eventually attending law school. I remember one of my very first final examinations for a community college English class. The assignment was to write one short paragraph on a computer. Keep in mind that this was a foundational course in reading and writing, not a college-level writing class. For most of the semester, we had focused on subject, verb agreement. By mid-semester, we were practicing writing full sentences. And for this particular assignment, the professor's instructions were to write one paragraph, double-spaced, with an indent to start the paragraph. Pretty simple stuff. Except, I didn't know how to indent a paragraph on a computer, and I definitely didn't know what double spacing meant. And how would I? While living in a school bus, I had never written a paragraph. My professor and my classmates tried to explain it to me, but still I didn't understand the concept of line spacing. I look back at moments like this and think that, as Dr. Duckworth points out, my talent was inversely related to my level of grit. People often tell me that I acquired my education because of hard work. I'm told that my story is proof that meritocracy works. You just have to work hard. There's no doubt that I worked hard, but I think there's more to the story. When I became a teenager, I quickly began to realize that although my situation of living in a school bus was uncommon, the problems that I was experiencing were far from unique to just me. Poverty, homelessness, a lack of education, history of family mental illness with no access to medical care, being racially profiled by police, and incarceration. These problems were prevalent throughout the country. Our nation is filled with resilient and hardworking young people, but too often there's little promise of them ever overcoming the conditions they were born into without consistent and long-term support. We know from Dr. Duckworth that resilience and grit are excellent predictors at long-term individual success. But given where our country is, I think we now have to focus on the larger social context for resilience. During my time conducting research on prison education and health and working in prison education classrooms, I've met with incarcerated students who've repeated high school and college level courses during their time of imprisonment. I've sat down with resilient students in prison classes, and I've often asked them, how many times have you taken this course? Some took the course for years. And when I would go and ask the prison administrators if my students could receive learning disability accommodations, the answer was always no. Denying disabled students disability accommodations while expecting them to work hard and take advantage of prison education, rehabilitation, illustrates a fundamental disconnect between the notions of meritocracy and success. Over the course of roughly 8 years that I spent in community college trying to play catch up with my education, being resilient wasn't always enough. Like when I retook algebra 6 times. At no point in the many years of repeating that course did a counselor or a teacher ever suggest that I be evaluated for a learning disability and be provided an accommodation, a resource that I needed. I was told that I just needed to work harder and be more resilient. Or one semester in particular, I held a campus job, and a college administrator pulled me aside and said, "Hey, Esteem, I took a look at your college transcript, and I'm going to withhold your pay until I see an improvement in your math grades." I was being told that I was going to get paid less so that I would be motivated to work harder in school. I was already struggling to balance 2 part-time jobs, an internship in the mayor's office, and attend school full-time. Back then, I didn't understand the concept of wage theft. All I knew was that I was being told to be more resilient. But in that moment, I didn't need to be more resilient. I needed a living wage, free community college, and access to a learning disability specialist. As a first-generation low-income student, I've experienced how higher education disproportionately saddles low-income students with a lifetime of debt and an expectation that we will work relentlessly over the course of our lives to financially recover. Is this what we mean by resilience? As a brother to someone with schizophrenia, I've seen how jails receive more funding for mental health resources than our community clinics, and how jails operate with the expectation that those with severe mental illness will return to jail for treatment of lifelong medical care. Is this what we mean by resilience? And there are countless other examples. A country with school shooter drills and insufficient gun laws, understaffed, under-resourced, and undervalued nurses, working in hospitals during a period of historic hospital profits, and insurance companies dictating who gets care and who has to be resilient. We now live in a society that unnecessarily demands resilience from us. But let's not ask people to be resilient just because they can be. From schools to prisons to hospitals, the underlying problems plaguing our institutions must be addressed. And we can come together and we can change our institutions. For example, California is moving in the direction of providing free community college to first-time college students. For those who have never enrolled in college, they now have access to tuition-free enrollment. I think that this is a great example, but I think we can go so much further. Whether you're a first-time college student or returning for your 6th year of algebra, money should not be a barrier to education. Over the years, many people have told me that I'm resilient because I succeeded in attaining an education. And while I believe that resilience can help us weather the storm of adversity, let's not confuse cultivating resilience with tokenizing a few resilient people as proof that our institutions are working effectively.